available after the time.
Okie dokie. Right, well, what I'm going to do is start with, I'm going to take you through a bit of a history lesson, talking about where blogging in general's come from, and business blogging, and I think sort of the whole context of what we think of as business blogging. So I'm going to take you back to 1993, so about 20 years ago. The web was, the internet's about 10 years old at this point, but most people weren't online. You've got less than 16 million people actually have internet connections. Most people aren't using it. The people who are generally have kind of intermittent, low quality connections. But we start getting web browsers, like Chrome and Internet Explorer. And Mosaic was one of the first web browsers. And they actually had a page called the What's New page, where they listed the new websites that were appearing on the internet, if you can imagine such a thing today. And it was updated daily, and it was archived monthly, and it was essentially kind of a set of interesting links of interesting things that were out there. So they were sort of pre-curating the web and actually forming the links that make the web. And as you can see, we've already sort of got this reverse chronology thing going on here with the dates, if you see here. So then a year later, we start getting what we think of as personal bloggers. And this is Justin Hall's first homepage. And he started off, like the Mosaic What's New page, it was basically a list of links of the interesting things that he found on the internet. There he is there. But he was 19, he was about to go to university, and that suddenly sort of swapped into him documenting every part of his life and sharing his thoughts and his ideas and what was going on while he was at university. And then a year later, this idea of personal publishing, it develops even more. So you've got Robot Wisdom, which is a website by a chap called Johan Barger, who is mostly posting essays on things like the internet and I think science fiction, I think John Maynard Keynes and sort of that kind of, the things that interested him. And it was a very popular website, bearing in mind, again, only 16 million people actually on the internet. And a couple of years later, in 1997, he adds a section to his website that he calls a weblog. And this was, again, the set of links, the things that he was finding on the internet, the places that he was going. So it was a log of the places he went on the web. And this is the first time that the word weblog is used. I mean, in this situation, he was differentiating between the weblog and the rest of his site. But as they say, kind of usage dictates. And so weblog became a word that people used. In 1998, in fact, a chap called Peter Merholt on his blog decided that he wasn't going to call it a weblog anymore. He was going to pronounce it weblog, or blog for short. I don't blame him, because weblog is a hell of a mouthful. Blog isn't much better. It's a fairly ugly word, but it's an improvement on weblog. If we were having to talk about weblogging all the time, we'd probably all be quite insane by now. So this takes us up to sort of the last 2 decades of the 20th century. And so last 2 years of the 20th century, 1998, 1999. And what you get at this point is you get an explosion in the development of software that people can use to publish online. So you've got things like Diaryland and LiveJournal and Blogger. And these were, places that you could share your thoughts and your ideas. And there were places that you could comment on other people's thoughts and ideas, and you kind of had this community building up and this conversation starting. Still very few people are actually online. We're up to 147 million at this point, which isn't a huge number. And blogging at this point is still very much seen as an individual pursuit. It's still a thing that people did on their own. Even if they were blogging about work, it was still stuff that they did on their own as a private individual. There was business stuff going on the web, but generally you had businesses with small 3-page static websites, like brochure sites, and then you had the big .com companies who were burning through money as though it was going out of fashion. But all of the conversation, all of what we think of as blogging, was happening over on these hosted sites. So then we get through there should be, yes, there's a logo there. We get through the 21st century, sort of comes along. We survive the dot-com bust. We survive the millennium bug, and the software keeps developing, and you get things like movable type, which was software that you could actually run on your own website. So you didn't have to go to somebody else's website to keep a blog. You could incorporate one on your own site. And this was fairly important for businesses because it meant that you could update your site yourself on a regular basis without worrying about breaking the entire site or the entire internet. A couple of years later, WordPress comes along. And again, highly influential. The actual WordPress blogs are fairly simple, but you can bolt it onto your existing website. You can keep it all under one domain and update things whenever you want. The important thing about when this happened in 2003, 2004 was Movable Type at this point actually decided to change the license for their software so not anybody could just use it. But WordPress was still open source, it was still free. So anybody could use it, anybody could change the code, anybody could adapt it and really improve the software. And it really, really took off. And 2003 is a big year for blogging. It's also a big year because Google, at this point, has become the largest search engine in the world. And they start kind of stretching out a bit and sort of extending their reach. And they go on a shopping spree. And they buy Blogger. And they also buy the company that developed AdSense. And by doing those two things, suddenly you've got personal bloggers, individuals just writing about their lives, can suddenly add advertising to their sites and generate a bit of income. There was advertising beforehand, but if you wanted somebody advertising on your site, you had to actually go and find them and arrange the adverts and sell the space and all that kind of thing. What happened in 2003 with Google and AdSense is it meant that you just provide the content, Google will provide the advertisers for you. So it had a really big impact. On the one hand, you've got individuals commercializing blogging like this, and on the other side, you've got businesses who can add a blog to their website and keep it regularly updated and improve their search engine rankings. And 2003 was also the year that Technorati started up, which was the blog search engine, where you could kind of go and see what blogs were out there. In 2004, Technorati started producing a quarterly report called the State of the Blogosphere. They only did it for a few years though, because this is what happened to the state of the blogosphere. So it went from almost no blogs at all in 2003 to March 2007, where you've got over 70 million blogs being tracked. And at this point, you've got a massive sort of explosion of people being on the web as well. By the end of 2003, we've gone to 790 million people have internet connections, which is more than 10% of the world population. By 2005, you've got over 1 billion people online, and that number of people who were getting online just kept going up, and they kept getting better internet connections, more regular, more reliable connections, and they were online for much longer. So the number of blogs just kept shooting up. By 2008, Technorati were tracking, I think it's like 112 million blogs. Which is the point where they stopped counting. And these are blogs, not just blog posts, actual blogs. Yeah, so they stopped counting then because it became pointless and quite difficult, because it was difficult to work out actually what a blog was and where the boundaries were between blogs and other forms of websites and online content. Because these days, you could have a website which is running WordPress or Joomla or Drupal, and that can have a blog on it. But equally, you can be using those things and not actually be blogging at all. You can use WordPress to build a website which doesn't contain anything that looks like a blog. You can be using, these hosted platforms like Blogger and Tumblr as a blog. You could be discarding text entirely and using photographs and blogging through Flickr or Instagram. Or you could be using video or audio. I mean, a podcast is essentially a perfectly legitimate blogging activity. And of course, you've got social networks like Facebook and LinkedIn, which also provide the capacity for blogging. They provide the same function to allow you to express yourself, to share links, to write essays if you want to. So the entire context and landscape starts to get really rather cluttered. If you add to the fact that you've got the Huffington Post, which is a blog that looks like a website, a newspaper rather, and then you've got the Washington Post, which is a newspaper that has bloggers. It has the journalists actually blogging in a separate part of the website. And then you've got the Guardian that is live blogging everything and now has a digital first approach to publishing. Then the whole online landscape has changed just beyond recognition from only 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And we're spending more and more time online to the extent that it's difficult to actually work out how much time we are spending online now. I think the latest sort of numbers came out that people in the UK, adults in the UK, spend an average of 17 hours a week online. And I think that was a slight dip from the previous year in terms of the amount of time people were reporting spending online. And that's partly because we don't notice when we're going online anymore. Previously when we went online, you had to make an effort, you had to make sure nobody was going to phone you. You had to sit down at your computer even. But if going online is something that you do through your phone or your iPod or your iPad or your Kindle or any number of internet connected devices, you don't tend to think of it as being online. So as the boundaries between blog and website have become more porous and less distinct, the boundaries between online and offline are blurring. It's just what we do these days. And all of this kind of leads to begging the question, when it comes to blogging for business, what does it actually mean to blog for business? If you look at all of these different activities, not one of them on its own is necessarily blogging, but each one are perfectly legitimate blogging activities. And I think part of the problem, actually, if you will forgive me a little bit to do a bit of a grammar lesson, is partly the terminology we use. If we have the sentence blogging for business and business blogging, the word blogging in that context, it feels like a verb, it feels like something that you do. But it's actually not. In that context, the word blogging it's actually the gerund form of the intransitive verb to blog, but it's forming the function of a noun. So it's acting like a noun. So it's like laughter to laughing, if that makes sense. So when we say blogging for business, we're actually saying laughter for business rather than laughing for business. And you can't do a noun. You can only do a verb. But we tend to think of it as a doing word. But if you're going to be blogging, you don't usually do the blogging. You sit down and you might write a blog post, you might find a photograph, you might tweet a link, you might publish an article, you might research a subject, but you very rarely find that what you're doing is blogging. It's a lot of other activities that build up into this larger subject. And it's when you break it down into what those smaller activities are, what the things that you're doing actually are, then thinking about it becomes more useful, because you can then identify whether that is a useful activity for you to be doing for your business. It's very difficult to argue that blogging for business is a good idea or a bad idea if you don't know what actually blogging for business is and what it means to your business. So if it means posting pictures of kittens, which is a perfectly legitimate blogging activity, then would you say that posting pictures of kittens is good for your business? For some businesses it might be, for other businesses less so. But if you think of your blog as a noun, as a thing, as a business tool, then it becomes easier sort of cognitively to work out how to use it. So for instance, if you compare your blog to your phone is a business tool, but you don't do phoning for business. I used to run an art gallery, and it was a lovely little art gallery, but I wasn't art gallerying for business. My art gallery was a tool in my business. So what you kind of need to do is just stop trying to do blogging. Think of the blog as a thing and work at what activities you're doing that help promote the blog or help the blog give your business the boost it needs. Does that make sense so far? Anybody got any questions yet? Nope. Okay, so far so good. So what happens when blogging goes bad? Just going to bring up now another set of slides, examples of bad business blogging practices. So we've got the 7 deadly business blogs here. And the first one, which is the one that you might be most familiar with, is the abandoned blog. And this is the blog that you set up in good faith, and you maybe write 3 posts in the first week, maybe 2 in the next week, and then a couple of weeks later you definitely mean to write another blog post, but you never quite get round to it. And then 2 months later you go, I'm definitely going to start blogging again, and you write something and you're really apologetic for not having blogged, and you say you're definitely going to do more, and then a couple of months pass and this happens again and again because you can't find the time to do it, you're not quite sure what to write, and it's just sort of sitting there making you feel really, really guilty for having it. But from the point of view of anybody who looks at your website, all they see is the blog with the tumbleweed going through it. They don't see your intention to blog. They don't see all the ideas that you've had that you're not quite sure how to work it out. All they see is the lack of activity. And it's because a blog, it takes commitment. You know, it's not something that you can just let run itself. You have to put time and resources into it, like any other business tool. And an abandoned blog kind of signifies to the entire world that you don't have the resources to manage this tool. And really, kind of with an abandoned blog, you have 2 options. The first option is just to start writing again, and the second option is to delete the entire thing. Because you don't have to have a blog. It's not compulsory. If you don't have time to have a blog, if you don't need a blog, if it's not serving any business function, you don't need a blog on your website at all. You really don't. But if you want to avoid an abandoned blog, you can do what some people do, and you can outsource your blog. You know, you can find people on Fiverr or Odesk or something like that, and they will write your blog posts for you. This is all great, except even if you can find somebody who is of a decent quality, they can only ever write fairly generic blog posts. You give them keywords, they write a keyword-full article. It might attract the search engines, but you don't really care about the search engines because the search engines aren't buying anything from you. If what you want is to get actual people on your site to pick up the phone, or to send you an email, or to share a link, then the actual content matters. And if the content on your blog is generic and just keyword focused and could be written by anyone for anyone, it's not selling your business. If your blog post that you bought from someone for, you know, 5 or 10 or 15 pounds, if that blog post could be taken from your blog and put on your direct competitor's blog by just tweaking a few words, it's not doing you any good. Your blog is an opportunity to break down the barriers between you and your readers and your customers. And outsourcing that process puts something in between you. So next we have the press release blog. Anyone who's ever had a business, who's ever written a press release and ever sent it out to the press, their kind of dream is that every time they send a press release, all the journalists just immediately print it word for word without any alteration. That would be fantastic if the press would do that, but they're not going to. And there's a reason they're not going to, and it's because the press have an understanding of what their readers want to read, and they understand what makes something interesting and what makes something really, really boring. And most of the time, your press release isn't interesting to anybody else apart from you. I mean, I used to work in PR, and the number of times you would get people who they wanted to send a press release out because they had a new website. And this is going back, you know, not even into the 90s. We're talking about the early part of the 21st century here, at a point where websites are not new and interesting things. And a press release is not an interesting thing for anybody else to read anyway. It's a technical document. The entire purpose of a press release is to get a journalist's attention and to get them to write a story about you. If your blog just lists things in the third person, written very factually, very dryly, anybody who looks at your website is going to think that you don't actually have anything to say for yourself. You know, having the press write about you is great because it's third-party endorsement. Having you put your own press releases on your site is like you telling everyone that you're fantastic and then pointing to you telling everyone that you're fantastic as the proof of that. It doesn't really convince anyone. And there's no point putting press releases on your blog to attract the press. You can have an archive, they like that, but no journalist is ever going to wander around the internet looking for stories and trying to find press releases that people have put on their blogs. They get 500 press releases into their inbox every day. And if your story can't get their attention in their inbox, it's not going to get anybody else's attention on your blog posts. Speaking of which, the next idea is the catalogue, the product listing blog. And this is partly to do with the fact that blogging software made it possible for people to update their own websites. So if you had a shop, if you had something with products, and you initially had, a 3-page static website with a blog added to it, then the temptation is to use that blog to list the products that you've got available. But that's not what a blog is for. And you're not going to get anybody interested in what you're doing by doing it that way. Blog software these days, you can still use the blog software to have your products, but don't put them actually in the blog because that just confuses people. It's like going to a Tupperware party, or rather, it's like going to a dinner party and then discovering it's a Tupperware party. And actually, all anybody's doing is showing off their plates and showing off, their beakers and showing off the wonderful things that they've got to store food in the fridge. It's tempting to put it out there because, you can update your content regularly. If you've got new products, you can just refresh it. But the blog is not the right place for it. It's also not the right place for doing the whole hard sell. Everyone's been to a networking meeting where the first thing somebody does is shake your hands and then tell you exactly why their product is fantastic. And some people, they can't really make the transition from sales in person to sales on the blog. And they kind of think that you can just do the same thing over and over again. And you can use your blog to just hammer home the features and the benefits, to hammer home how wonderful it is, to show off the products, to say, buy me, buy me, buy me, buy me, buy me, special offer this week, limited supply, all of these kind of hard sell tactics that we know and that we hate when we find them in real life. I mean, these sales tactics, they do work offline, but they work partly because people are polite and because people are trapped. Used car salesmen get the sale by convincing somebody to buy it now, otherwise it won't be available. By convincing them almost that it's easier to buy the car and then bring it back later than to have the argument that you don't want to buy it. People don't like saying no in person. But the thing about a website, the thing about a blog, is that it's not impolite to click away. It's not impolite just to go somewhere else. So if you're trying to sell through your blog, then you're just wasting your time because people can turn it off really, really quickly. But at least kind of these sales-driven sites are focused. They have a purpose, they have a point. The next kind of bad blog is the one which I call the anything goes blog. It's the blog that's not quite sure what it wants. And often it comes about because you've got somebody who, they have to blog for business. They know they have to blog for business. Everyone has said, blog, 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 it's brilliant. And they sit down and they can't think of anything to write. So maybe they'll have a blog about, what they were doing in work that day. Maybe the next blog they'll have might be about the holiday they took, or it might be a joke, or it might be a video, or it might be a political rant, or it might be incredibly formal, or maybe it's incredibly light-hearted. But they kind of think of their business blog as though it was their personal blog where they can just put all of their thoughts out there. And this is particularly difficult for those of us who run our own business, and for those of us who the boundary between us and our business is not always that distinct. And there's a temptation for us to think, well, it's all me, so I can put it all out there, and it doesn't really matter what anybody thinks, because you can take me as I am. If you don't like it, go and find someone else. Except what it does is confuses people. It creates this unclear image of what the blog is about, what your business is about, and what you are about. None of us are actually the same person when we talk to our parents from when we talk to our best friends, to when we talk to a stranger in the street. We put a different face on each time. We have a different persona. We have a different relationship with each of those people, and that's reflected in what we talk about and how we talk. And your blog should be the same. You can't just use it as a dump for every thought that occurs to you. You need to work out what the relationship is between you and your audience, and work out what that conversation is that you all should be having. And the final of the 7 deadly blog posts is what I call the staff newsletter blog. It's the blog that gets updated whenever a new member of staff joins the team, or whenever you go on an away day. It's the one that has the information about the annual general meeting. It's all interesting stuff if you happen to work for that company, and possibly it might have a place on the intranet, but it's not a thing that you should be putting on your blog. As a customer, I don't really care if you've just hired somebody new, unless they're fantastic. And if they're fantastic, don't just tell me you've hired somebody fantastic. Get them to write a blog post about something fantastic. I mean, in a sense, the last one is the worst of all, not because of what it does, but because of what it doesn't do. These are the blogs which are so close to being good business blogs, but they're just written so boringly and so dryly and in such a sort of corporate business tone that no one ever wants to read them. They're of no interest at all to anybody, ever. And what you need to do is try and find a way to engage the people that you want to talk to. You need to remember that they are human beings, you are a human being. As I said, blogging breaks down these barriers, and you need to try and make sure that you're bridging that gap rather than putting up walls in between. So how do you actually do business blogging well? It depends. It always depends. But it depends on what your business is. It depends on who your customers are. And it depends on what you want your business to be doing and your blog to be doing for your business. So I'm just going to share, hopefully now you should be sharing a screen. Very soon with a couple of blogs on it. Can everybody see that one? You should be able to see the English Cut blog at the moment. Is that working? Fantastic. Okay, so here's just a handful of blogs that I've seen, that I like, that I think do good and interesting things. This first one, this is a blog by a chap called Thomas Mann. He's a tailor. That's the English Cut blog, and it was one of the first and the earliest blogs that really sort of caught the attention of the world's media in terms of business. And he's a tailor. He lives in Cumbria. He works on Savile Row, and he just makes really, really nice suits. And what he did was he just blogged about the process. So if we go back to, let's see if we can find his archive, all the way back to say March 2005. So you can see, the sort of things that he's talking about. He's just talking about what it's like as a tailor. He's not necessarily talking about the suits. He's not necessarily talking about the prices. He's not doing a hard sell thing. He's not trying to convince you that he is an authority. He's just showing you what it's like being a tailor. He's just telling you and talking about the interesting things that are going on. There's a certain amount of educating going on, but mostly it's the sort of things that you would talk about with a customer that you know very well if you happen to see them in the street or on a train, or you were just spending time talking to them. And it was wildly successful for him. He's still in Cumbria, I believe, and he's still on Savile Row, but he flies all over the world to do suits for people these days. He had an incredible following of people who were interested in what he had to say, whether they were buying a suit now or whether they were going to buy a suit in 10 years' time. Just the insight into the world of a tailor was interesting because it was interestingly written, and it was clearly coming from him. If we go to the other end of the scale, we've got the Evernote blog. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with Evernote because it's an incredibly useful tool. Evernote, very techy. You don't necessarily want to know what's going on in development. You just want to know what developments are happening. And so what they tend to do is they update their blog when they've got things like an update to the software. They'll tell you what the software is doing. They don't talk about the actual, line by line edit of the code, because that's not what their market's interested in. But they tell you when there's an update that you can get hold of. There's a blog post about a workshop so you can use Evernote better. Let's see, I might go to that. Yeah, so they've got tips on how to use Evernote better. All these kind of things. It's very much how you as a customer can use their product, how their product can benefit you. But it's not salesy in a buy this now, use this now. It's just doing a good job in reminding you about all the useful things. And for something like Evernote, which is quite a complicated piece of software, it's a really good way of getting the information out there in small pieces, in bite-sized chunks that people can understand. And it's a great way of keeping their customers up to date with the changes. Because this kind of software changes and gets updated a lot, it's useful to know when there are updates available. Another technical company, Buffer, they have a completely different kind of blog. Buffer is software that can schedule tweets and schedule posts to Facebook. But that's going to be really boring as a blog. No one wants to know about that because no one actually cares about scheduling tweets and scheduling posts to Facebook. What they care about, if you're using Buffer, is things like productivity, life hacks, writing, and so on. So what they've done is they've built a blog around those things. And they write about business, they write about productivity, they write about the things that their customer base is interested in. They don't necessarily write about their actual product. And this has been wildly successful for them. And they've been, guest blogging all over the place and getting guest bloggers to come in. Well, apparently you can't hear me. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me at all? Oh, yes. Susie's waving. Okay. Yeah, so they have a different approach. They're not updating you about what Buffer does. They're assuming that you know that. But they're just tapping into an interest that you have around the same kind of subjects. A similar blog, but a less technical one, is the blog from Sugru. And Sugru is this kind of cool sort of blue techie stuff that dries hard. So you can use Sugru to fix things and to mend things. So it's quite a funky product. And what they do in their blog posts is it's very much a kind of community-based blog. They share things that people are doing with their product. So whereas Evernote was telling you the things that you can do with your product, Sugru tells you by showing you what other people are doing with their product. It engages with their customers. You know, you've got photographs of their customers doing things. Yeah, so you've got photographs of Sugru actually being used to fix things. But it's all about, you know, making and DIY and being outdoors and reusing things, because that's what their customers want, and that's what they're giving them. They're showing them how the product works for them. And then, you know, a completely different blog is the Feeding Hannibal blog. Now, this isn't a large company. This is one person. This is Janice Poon, who's an arts food stylist. And she was the person who was working on the recent series of Hannibal. And what she did for that is she set up a blog just about the food that was produced for the series. I don't know if any of you have been watching it, but obviously kind of a main plot in Hannibal is that it's about Hannibal Lecter. He's a fantastic chef, but he tends to cook with people. So the food plays quite a significant part. And what you've got these sketches of the food, you've got the photographs of the food, you've got the recipes for the food that you can go and cook for yourself. You know, you've got stories about going and buying pig's lung because it's the best equivalent to human lung. And again, you know, it's a really, really interesting blog. And if you like the program, you're going to love the blog. And what it's done is it's really helped her be associated with the website, so with the program, in a way which she might not have done before. You might kind of know her name, but by reading this blog, you get a feel for what she does and how she does it. So as a professional sort of freelancer, it's a really, really useful tool for her. She's used it to carve out a reputation beyond the reputation she had, on the back of the fact that she's done this fantastic work on Hannibal. And the difference between all of these blogs and, you know, the 7 bad types of blogs, it's really just a question of purpose. It's a question of understanding, you know, understanding your business, understanding your audience, understanding the conversation you want to have with them, and understanding what you want your blog to do. So part of what the Evernote blog does is actually sort of field some customer service things. So people don't have to get in touch with them because the information might already be there on the blog. Part of what the Buffer blog does is marketing, because if you're interested in productivity, then you might find the company by finding an interesting article on the blog. You know, the Sugru blog ties into a sense of community. The English Cut blog really, again, establishes himself as a figure of authority, somebody who is an expert who knows what they're talking about. But it also kind of breaks down the barriers, so you don't think Taylor Savile Row, you know, horribly uptight and stuffy. You read about him and you read what he says and you think, he sounds like a nice person. He sounds like somebody I would enjoy working with. He sounds like somebody who's approachable. You know, you get to know that person, so when you do decide you're going to spend however much money it is on a bespoke suit, you call the person that you already know because you've been following their blog. But these blogs work because they understand how they're using the tool. They understand whether they're using it for reputation building or for customer service, or for marketing. And they understand who their audience is and what their audience wants to read. So they don't worry about posting sort of 6 times a day if their readers don't want to read something 6 times a day. They can tailor what they're writing to their audience much, much more. Is this all making sense? Jackie's telling me it's nearly 12:15. So yeah, I mean, essentially, the first part of blogging for business is to get your head around the idea that blogging is no different from any other part of your business. So it's like saying marketing for business. If you're using it as marketing, you need to work out how you can use it for marketing. If you're using it for customer service, you need to work out what customer service role the blog is fulfilling. And once you have that better idea, once you have a goal, once you understand the context and the landscape, it's much, much easier to actually find things to write about. I often equate it to, buying presents at Christmas. If I said, go and buy a present for a 14-year-old boy, you'd go, okay, well, there's lots of things that they might like. I could, go and buy something generic, maybe something football related, I don't know. But if I said go and buy a present for, your nephew Jack, and you knew that Jack was, a fanatic ballet dancer, you knew that he absolutely loved going to see the Matthew Bourne ballets, and you knew that he wanted to go to the Royal Ballet School, or you knew that he was really interested in something else very specific, or you knew that he couldn't read, or you knew that he actually had an IQ of 150. The more you know somebody, the easier it is to buy a present for them. I don't have any trouble buying a present for my sister because I've known her my entire life. But buying a present for a generic 36-year-old woman would be much more difficult. And your blog is the same. You need to understand what the point of your blog is and what your relationship is with your readers through the blog. And then it's much, much easier to actually write the content and keep it updated regularly. And I think that's mostly kind of what I was going to talk about today. The session in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, no questions, ladies. Well, I don't know about you, ladies, but I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed the photographs as well in the 7 bad section. I would like to thank Lydia for joining us. I think it was a very informative presentation. So thank you, Lydia. I really look forward to the training in a couple of weeks' time as well. Ladies, if you've got any questions that you think about after this, please email through to either myself or Lydia. I will give you her details. Or you can find her on the What She Said website. That's it. Thank you very much for attending, coming and listening, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully on the training in a couple of weeks. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lydia.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.